All right, buckle up, mofos. We're about to get into handout 9, which is a really long handout. All right, demo the shit out of this. Okay, so we talked a little bit about adjustment layers in that last video, right, where we went and we made a black and white layer and we made a hue saturation layer to adjust brightness, which is frankly a weird way to do it, but whatever. We are now going to dive into what is the most, without any argument by anyone who I'm going to mention, useful adjustment layer, and that is our friend, the curves layer. There is a whole beautiful, aesthetically pleasing, conceptually nuanced, intellectually better than the president handout on it in there, handout 9. Very proud of it, right? I think it's good. So that's what I'm going to be doing. I'm going to be following along with that. You can follow along too. And we start out with this photo of this guy. His name is Steven. And what we're going to do with this, this is a picture that, well, it's a picture that I made, but it also has this really handy gradient on one side of it. Now that gradient is going to give us a sort of tonal range from black to white. I've divided it up into pieces because when I didn't, it was a little harder to see where the shifts were, sort of with our brains. So I've divided up into pieces, but it is, I assure you, a continuous tonal range. If we look at our layers here, we have some lovely, I don't know who did this, but they get an A, some lovely organization here. We have our pixel layers, and in there we have a bike, we have a black strip, we have a gradient, we have a white backdrop, all of those, so good. Oh my gosh. And then in our adjustment layers, we just have something that makes it black and white because it is indeed originally a somewhat color picture. So that's cool. I think maybe in the copy that you have there is also a curves layer, but if there is not, we are going to go right here to that black and white layer, which again, pretty sure in yours should be renamed to overall black and white, because like, man, this person, their grade just... all right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go down here, I'm going to go down to that black and white cookie, again, where we get our adjustment layers. You can also go up to layer and new adjustment layer, but me, who doesn't like a cookie, right? Cookies, they're great. Go to the black and white cookie. Ignore the name that the black and white cookies are given in Germany, which they call them Amerikaners because they are black and white, and apparently racial equity to the Germans is a uniquely American trait. As an American, I don't know we're doing so well with that, but you know, okay, fine, whatever. All right, black and white cookie for what it's worth, and we're gonna go down here to curves. All right, we're not going to levels. Anyone likes levels? Like, going down to curves. Curves are awesome. And I'm going to rename it something. Again, yours probably already has it renamed to something. I'm going to call it overall curves demo layer. I don't know, man. It's just what I'm doing. Okay, so here we have our adjustment layers. Important things to note, they are above our pixel layers. You want your adjustment layers above your pixel layers because they are going to impact whatever layers are below them, right? If your image, if your picture is above your adjustment layer, not going to do anything. So adjustment layer is on top, pixel layer is below, right? Does this always work out? No, sometimes you have a very complicated set of layers. We will, at some point, have a very complicated set of layers. Right now, no, it's fine. ignore if you can hear it, the trash truck in the background. All right, so there's my overall curves demo layer. I'm going to double click on this part of it, which will bring up properties. Oh my gosh. It's New York. Who doesn't want properties? Become a real estate baron. Dock that. Okay, so with that curves layer selected, my properties panel palette thing is going to show me this. So this is the curves palette, and it has a histogram running along there underneath, and then it has this little line that apparently in the handout I refer to as a rubber band. I don't know what it's actually called in the Photoshop canon, Photoshop lore. Rubber band isn't bad, right? Because you move it around, it's a little stretchy. So I'm gonna stick with that. But histogram underneath. In the handout, I am just gonna briefly show this to you because, again, not gonna lie, I think it's pretty good. I go a little bit into what the histogram is. Now you've had me before, probably done this already, but a histogram is just a bar chart of how many pixels you have at each level of brightness, right? So on one side we have absolute blackness, how many pixels we have up or down. Over on the other side, absolute whiteness, how many pixels we have up or down. And then at every gradation between those two values, right, from 0 to 255, how many pixels do we have, right? So if we have 8 pixels at the value of 3, okay, well, that's what it looks like on our histogram. So I have some little handy charts that show that in a really simplified way. So here is my document that is a 16 pixel document. It's 4 pixels across, 4 pixels high. If it is black on the left, white on the right, this is its histogram, right? 8 pixels black, 8 pixels white. One thing that's important to note, and this probably is not an issue for you, right? You're not necessarily coming to this with some preconceived notion of how things work. If you're a videographer and you've been working with scopes, then this is a bit confusing. If you're not a videographer and you haven't been working with scopes, ignore those words because they mean nothing. All three of these images have the same histogram, right? So the top one, divided symmetrically, black and white. Middle one, even mix of black and white squares. Bottom one, irregular mix, black and white squares. Doesn't matter where the squares are. All that matters is how many there are of each value, right? Each one of these images has half the squares are black, half the squares are white. 8 black squares, 8 white squares. QED, exactly the same histogram. If we go into something that's a little bit different, right? So here we have something that has a light gray, right? So it's not black or white, it's a light gray. All the pixels are the light gray, that's 16 pixels. So here on our chart, right, going from black to white, going from 0 pixels to 16 pixels, we have over here in the light gray, arbitrarily chosen spot, a chart that graph has 16 pixels high because all 16 pixels are whatever that light gray is. Here, right, I added some black pixels, right? Each one of those replaced a light gray pixel. So now I have 3 black pixels and 16 minus 3 is 13 light gray pixels. And then this one here, right, again, there's like 4 black pixels, 6 dark gray pixels, 1 light gray pixel, and 5 white pixels, right? What does that mean? I mean, it doesn't mean anything, but like I'm just trying to explain how histograms work. It is a bar chart. It goes from darkest values to lightest values, and then how many there are at any given point. So that's super important for looking here at our curves layer, because underlying this curves palette, whatever, the way that we interface with that image, the way that we adjust things is going to require us to understand what that histogram is representing. Excuse me. All right, so popping back here to Photoshop. Okay, here we are. There is that histogram, again, bar chart. If we look at it, there's not a lot of black pixels. There's not a lot of white pixels. There's a bunch of sort of like medium light pixels, right? And looking at the image, okay, that makes sense, right? Here's a bunch of area that's pretty light. All those buildings back there. Here's some area that is very light. There's a little bit of very dark areas, but not a whole hell of a lot. So let's go here and look at these endpoints, right? So we have endpoints here on the white side, endpoints here on the black side. There are two ways to adjust the endpoints. One is by grabbing the triangle at the bottoms, and one is by grabbing this point itself at the end of the rubber band. So what I am going to do, drag this down a little bit. First, I'm going to go ahead and grab that triangle, and I'm going to grab the triangle on the white side, and I'm going to pull it over, I don't know, a third of the way. So as I do that, right, you can see the image definitely changes. And what we're doing, that triangle represents the point at which the pixels have gone to white, right? 100% white. Everything beyond that, right? You can't get any whiter than white. So everything beyond that is also 100% white. So it's basically just dragging down what the brightest possible value is in our image. And so a lot of these pixels that before were a light gray are now an absolute white. And if we look at our image and we look at our gradient, we can see that that is the case. So looking at our gradient, right, before we had this much smoother fall off that hit absolute white, maybe around here somewhere. We pulled it down, and now we've already gone to white right here, right? So much earlier, all of these things that before were shades of gray, now absolute white starts there. All of those have been clipped, all of those have been cut off, all of those have been just rendered as also being off the charts, totally white. You don't have to do it by grabbing that triangle at the bottom. You could do it, if I drag that back over, by grabbing that thing at the top and pulling it over, right? Same exact impact, right? So this diagonal line is going from things that are totally black to things that are totally white. Okay, drag that back over there, or you can hit Command Z, whatever you want. I'm going to do the same thing on the shadow side. Grab that, pull it over, and you can see that it does the same thing, right? So now the blackest values, right, before we sort of had our black cut off down here somewhere. Now as I pull that over, right, now already at this point, things are starting to be 100% solid black. And you can see that the shadows in here are also blocked up. Something that's really important to note about the curves adjustment is that it's not like adjusting exposure, right? So it doesn't make everything darker, right? So I've made the shadows darker, right? I sort of like moved the point at which it cuts off to be black. I've moved that up, but my highlights are still pretty much unchanged, right? If I look at that sky up here, if I look at my gradient over here, the fact that I'm adjusting those shadow areas, right, has very little impact on it. And I was struggling with a way to try and explain how this interface shows that. And what I've settled on, and if you find a better one, holler at me, please. Right, if you think about, here's that original sort of datum diagonal line going through there, that rubber band line. And if you look at the distance between where our current line is and that rubber band line, right, that original datum, you can see that it's a much bigger shift here, right, at the bottom, than it is up at the top. So I've pulled my values down to being 100% black at this point, right? I haven't done it on the other side. I haven't changed anything on the other side. So that means that here down at the bottom, there's a much bigger gap between where I started out and then shifting down to where I am now. In the middle, right, still a gap, but less so between where I started out and where I am now. And then up at the top, there's almost no gap at all, right? So the areas of very bright highlights have not really changed. All right, so that's really important to think about, right? If when I make this curves adjustment, right, I can adjust where the shadows cut off, I can adjust where the highlights cut off, but I'm not affecting every single pixel in the image. I'm only affecting parts of that tonal range. I'm essentially increasing contrast by making things go to black faster or making things go to white earlier. 9 times out of 10, right? Almost every layer, every file that I bring to Photoshop gets a curves adjustment layer. 9 times out of 10, the things that I'm doing are bringing those highlight sort of clipping point down a little bit to clean up a white, right? If I have like a seamless or something, I'm like, it's just not quite as poppy as I'd like, I'll bring that down, right? Which is a great thing to do in post. Don't want to do it while you're shooting. You want to leave yourself a little bit of wiggle room. Doing it in post seems great. The other thing that I do, probably more than anything else, is I go in here, I grab the midpoint, and I bring that up a little bit. Almost, I mean, I don't want to say every image, but like so many images. Because I've shot them a little bit darker to give myself a little bit of headroom. I looked at them on my screen. It looked bright. I look at it on my calibrated monitor. It's not as bright as I thought. I don't want to mess with my highlight point or my shadow point. I just want to bring up those midtones a little bit, right? Midtones also, right? A lot of like white people's skin tones, right? They're in the midtones somewhere. If I want to bring up somebody's face a little bit, same thing. Grab that midpoint and bring it up. There's better ways to do this, right? When we get into sort of like working on part of the image rather than just part of the tonal range. But bringing up those midtones happens all the time. So I've done that there, right? I went and grabbed that, brought it up. You'll see the highlights, the shadows stay basically the same. There's a nice smooth roll off from my big adjustment in the middle to my small adjustment on the ends. And it looks pretty good. Come down here, click it on, click it off. All right, you know, don't hate it. Okay, so that is the sort of basic understanding of what curves do. Now, something that everybody does, he said, giving me side eye. Something that everybody does is that they're like, I really want to affect this one part of the curve. So I'm going to go up here and move this, and then I can move that, right? And at some point, you just get crazy town images. Right? Okay, fine. That's great. You're right. We've gone in here. We've said, okay, shadows start out the same. Then like things that are kind of dark, I'm going to bring those all the way up to white. Things that are a little bit brighter, I'm going to bring those all the way down. Things that are a little bit brighter than that, back up again. Things that are a little bit brighter than that, all the way down again, right? And so we have, if we look at our gradient, now it's like white to black, to white, to black, to white, to black. And that remapping of our tones looks like some kind of crazy acid trip insanity. I say this just to mention it because, I mean, don't do that. You probably, at this point, only really want to have one adjustment point being added, right? Grab that middle, bring it up a little bit, bring it down a little bit. If you want to add another one or another two, like give a little bit of an S curve for some contrast, okay, but like, watch yourself so you don't end up with some garbage like that. All right, so enough of that. Please do not, I'm not going to save that. Okay, so that is the magic of what curves do. And now we're going to go ahead and look at some practical implications for the curves adjustment. To do that, I'm going to go and grab my curves portrait exercise. Boop. And again, following along in my handout. This is some kind of portrait, right? It's all right. It's a little, I don't know, man. Somebody didn't do a very good job taking this picture. It was me. Great, it's there. I'm gonna go ahead and first thing I'm gonna do, I'm gonna duplicate that layer. I'm gonna call my duplicate copy original. I'm gonna call my first one main. Doesn't really matter which one you call what, right? I just want to have two identical copies of the layer. Why? Well, if I was like a professional retoucher, I wouldn't, right? I'm doing this so that if I screw up during the process of trying to figure out what I'm doing, because I'm just starting out with this, I have this original there that I can fall back on. So I'm going to go down to that original. I'm going to hide it, right? Turn it off. And I'm just going to work here on my main layer. So this image is okay, I guess. But, right, background, kind of dark, overall exposure, kind of dark. So we're going to fix that using curves. I'm going to go down here to the black and white cookie, click on it, curves layer, boom. And again, the thing that I know I want to do is that my highlights, that thing that should be white, is too dark. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go up to that highlights thing. I'm going to grab it. I'm going to bring it over, right, that highlight start point a little bit. So there's my curves layer. Here's my curves palette. I'm going to grab that highlight point and pull it over to the left. And wow, that, not going to lie, that looks a lot better. So again, right, just like anything else, we can like play with the shadows if you want to. We could grab some midtones, bring those around a little bit. I'm going to be honest and say that bringing those highlights up, right, it brings the highlights up, makes all these things white. And in doing that, right, look at the distance between our rubber band and that original datum. It's also brightened up everything else, going minimally down to the shadow detail. So shadow, absolute black stays the same. Coming up from that, everything gets adjusted a little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more, until you get to the highlights, which have been adjusted a lot. And frankly, that looks pretty great, right? So we've managed to adjust the midtones, bring those up, everything in there pretty spiffy. If I wanted to, maybe I could bring up those midtones just a little bit more, but I'm not really going to worry about it. While I'm here, right, looking at this practical example, I am going to show you a couple of additional things. So if I hold down the Option key, right, while I drag these endpoints, it can give you this really handy sort of preview visualization of what you're doing. So I hold down the Option key, drag the highlight point down, and it's going to show you this like super high contrast preview where the things that are white are 100% 255 white, right? Because one of the problems is if I'm looking at this versus this, I don't know, man, it all looks pretty frickin' white to me. Like, is it 100% white? Is it 98% white? Is it 96% white? Like, I don't know. But I hold down the Option key, click on that highlight point, and I can see, oh yeah, that upper corner, not 100% white, drag it over, and boop, right? I can also see now, looking at this, that there are some areas in her collar, let up the Option key, let up that are also getting blown out, right? Do I care? No, right? That seems fine. Okay, so that's helpful. The same thing happens if I hold down Option and grab the shadows, shadow slider, right? It's just going to show me the things that are 100% absolute definitely black. In this case, that's not that important, right? I'm not really worrying about making sure I have some solid black shadows. I was really worrying about getting that thing up to 100% white. So all of that looks great. Once I've gotten it looking the way that I want, right? And a lot of the times it'll be a little bit more fiddly, right? You may have to bring your highlights down a little bit, but again, here we have a nice white backdrop. Maybe you don't. Maybe you're mostly bringing those midtones up, fooling around a little bit with the shadows to give a little bit of punch, a little bit of contrast, bring those highlights down a little bit. Once you've done all of that, we're going to rename our layer. Overall, I don't know. Increase brightness highlights. I don't know, something that makes sense to you, right? You're the one who needs to figure it out. In this case, I'm also the one who needs to figure it out because I'm going to be the one grading it. So don't name it some thing that only you understand. Okay, that looks great. And then I'm going to go ahead and make a group, right? That's clicking that little folder down there. I'm going to call it adjustment layers. And I'm going to drag this in there, right? So you can see it's inset a little bit. If I twiddle the adjustment layers group open and closed, it is visible or invisible to me. And if I hide or show, the entire adjustment layers folder gets that whole thing. While I'm doing that, I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing for the pixel layers. All right, remember the pixel layers go below it. Take that main original, drag them in there, twiddle it open and close, make sure they're in there, and you are good to go. So that's how we adjust tone and brightness in here. I'm going to go ahead and make a new clip, and then I will show you how we do some color adjustment also with the curves layer. So we'll be right back.